syndicated sex advice columnist with his Savage Love column. Now he is a household name thanks to It Gets Better video project, which has gained immense popularity since its creation in September 2010. Inspired by gay teen suicides, Dan Savage is showing LGBT youth around the world that it indeed does get better. Millions have participated and been inspired by his project so far. With his frank and funny advice on sex and relationships, he creates a safe space for all audiences to honestly discuss taboo topics. Please join me in welcoming the cultural Catholic of cultural Catholics, Mr. Dan Savage.
Before I begin, I'm going to talk a little bit about the It Gets Better project and a little bit about Catholicism, with which I have some experience. I want to, before I talk about It Gets Better, talk about a couple of my favorite Catholics, because sometimes I'm accused of being anti-Christian or anti-religious people, particularly anti-Catholic. And I certainly don't feel that way. I identify as Catholic, culturally Catholic. My dad was in the first class of the ordained permanent diaconate in Chicago. John Cardinal Cody came to our house for dinner more than once. And one time when my parents had to pick him up, my mother would not get in the back seat to let him ride in the front, just so he knew what was going on at our house. And my mother's one of my favorite Catholics. And when I came out to my mother in 1981-ish, that summer, she, became P-Flag Supermom eventually. But that summer was pretty rocky, and she took it very hard. My dad was a Catholic deacon, my mom was a Catholic lay minister. I am that rarest of thing, a Catholic preacher's kid. You have to be Anglican usually to make that happen. And she called a priest, one of our priests, who came to the house. My mom called and said, "Oh, Father Tom, we're having a crisis, the family thing, please come. I have to talk to you." And Father Tom came to the house, sat on the porch swing with my mom, and my mom looked at him and, all in tears, said that Danny told me he's gay. And Father Tom looked at my mother and put his hand on her knee and said, "Judy, so am I." And it helped. It really helped my mom. And he went on to add that it is better this way. That he knew that I had been in a Catholic seminary for part of high school. But it was better that I live out and openly and with some integrity and be truthful with my family and people that I loved, than to live the way he had lived. He had attempted to drown his homosexuality in alcohol, as so many Catholic priests of this generation attempted. And he explained to her that all things being equal, it was better for me to tell her the truth than to lie to her all her life. And to this day, Father Tom is one of my favorite Catholics, as is my mother, as was my mother. She recently, not too recently, 3 years ago, passed away. And the very last thing that I did for my mother, that horrible day at the hospital, was run screaming through the intensive care unit to find a priest, another priest who could come to her and give her comfort in this moment, to give her last rites. So, when people say that I'm anti-Catholic or anti-religious, some of the things I say in public are tough, and I punch people who punch me, I punch them back. But I don't consider myself anti-Catholic or anti-religious in any true sense. Last year, in September, I read about the suicide of Billy Lucas, who was a 15-year-old kid growing up in Greensburg, Indiana, where he was subjected to some really brutal bullying. He was targeted. I hope that's my mother. She's trapped in the plumbing. And he was subjected to brutal bullying, and the kids at his school encouraged him to go home and kill himself, and that's just what he did. He went to his grandmother's barn and he hanged himself. His mother found his body. He was 15 years old. And I read about Billy Lucas, and then I read that his peers crowded onto a Facebook memorial page that his family created for him to celebrate his death, to mock him even in death, in this venue where his family and friends would have to read it. And I was angry, and I read an angry blog post, which is something I'm very good at. And a commenter left a note in the blog post directly addressing Billy Lucas, and all it said was, "I wish I had known you and been able to tell you that things get better. Rest in peace." And that stuck in my head last September. It stuck in my head, things get better. So it was certainly true, and it was certainly true in my own life. When I came out in 1981, when I told my Catholic parents, my evangelical Catholic talking in tongues parents, that I was gay, I wasn't just telling them, I wasn't just plaguing them with mental images that took them years to expunge. I was telling them that I would never marry, that I would never have children, and that I could never be a Marine. And they took that personally. They felt that this was a rejection of everything that they stood for. And here I am 30 years later, and I am married, and I have a child. I gave my parents their second grandchild, and my brothers and sisters their second nephew. And now I can be a Marine. I don't want to be a Marine. I don't think the Marines want me to be a Marine. But I could be a Marine. Things have really gotten better for us. And that was rattling around in my head. I was going from college to college, speaking, as I often do, last September, thinking about just Billy Lucas. This was all before it turned into a season of suicides. And it just occurred to me that I needed to be going from high school to high school, middle school to middle school, but I would never get an invitation to speak in a high school unless the principal wanted to be fired. And I would never get particularly the permission from the parents whose kids most need to hear from LGBT adults to speak to their kids, to speak to them. And that was kind of tormenting me. I kept reading about Billy Lucas, kept thinking about how things get better, kept thinking about these kids trapped in places like Greensburg, Indiana, where there is no gay youth support group, there are no GSAs, and how they need our example. They know we're out here happy, successful, fully integrated into the life of this country, gay, lesbian, bi, and trans adults, but they don't know how we got here. They don't know how you got from a 15-year-old bully queer kid in Greensburg to happy, successful. They may even assume that nobody who suffered what they suffered could be one of these happy, successful, integrated, and loved, and reconciled to their families, LGBT adults they've seen on television. How do you get to be Ellen one day? And on the train to JFK, it just occurred to me that I was waiting for permission that in the YouTube, Facebook, Twitter era, I no longer needed. I was waiting for an invitation I no longer required, that I could record a video, look into the camera, address LGBT kids, and tell them it gets better, and share with them how it gets better, and encourage other LGBT adults, using the privilege that my column and podcast give me, encourage other LGBT adults to do the same. So I was acutely aware when I first thought of recording this video, that not all LGBT kids look like me, or want the same things I want, or have from the same backgrounds that I'm from, or will go for the same things in life that we've gone for. And so I called Terry, who is my, as I like to call him, husband in Canada, boyfriend in America, or Hick Bay, is the And I said, I have this idea, I want to record a video, I want to call it Gets Better, I want to get other people to do it, and I want to put it online, I want to not feel terrible when I read about an LGBT kid who's committed suicide, for not having done something, for not feel like I wish I could have talked to that kid. I want to try to talk to those kids before, not after, not just feel regret and remorse. And the trick was, Terry, we've been together 17 years. And in all that time, Terry has never allowed anyone to take his photograph. He's never been interviewed. He's never been on television. He's an intensely private person who married a memoirist who's written 2 books about it. And people wanted to talk to Terry and take pictures, wanted to come to our house, wanted to film interviews with the 3 of us, Terry and I and DJ. he always, every time, every request, said no. And that's one of the reasons I love him, because he's stronger in the face of a media request than I am. I'm a media whore. I was like, yeah, nice. He's very grounding. And so I called him and said, I want to do this thing. I want to call it It Gets Better project. And I want to create a channel. I want to collect videos and slip them into the homes of parents who would never give us permission to talk to their kids. And he said that that was a good idea and I should do it. And then I said, well, there's a catch. I want you to do it with me. Because there's enough videos online of me talking. And I want us to do it together. Because the idea was to share our joy. Because, you know, a bullied 13-year-old queer kid out in the sticks, I believe some of them are taking their lives because they can't imagine a future for themselves with enough joy in it to compensate for the pain they're in now. And so I wanted to share our joy. And he is my joy. So much of my joy. I couldn't do it without him. And he immediately said yes, without another word. He just said, yeah, of course, I will do it. And I was really touched. And I got on the airplane, and I went home, and we called our friend, the videographer, Kelly, and she came over to our house. She was the second person who immediately said yes, who recognized the power of the idea. And we recorded the first It Gets Better video in our living room, dining room, against a blank wall. No one's ever seen that video. We recorded the first It Gets Better video, but we never showed it to anybody. The first one that people talk about, mine and Terry's, is actually the second It Gets Better video. Because after we watched the first take, we looked at each other and said, any queer kid who wasn't suicidal before he watched it is going to be suicidal after. Because we got it exactly backwards. We spoke for 14 minutes about the bullying that we did. And we spoke for a minute about our joy. I attribute that to my Catholicism. It's hard to ask a Catholic to share their joy. We're Catholics. Terry, we're Catholics. You don't talk about your joy because God will overhear you and take it away. So we had another run. And actually, Terry always likes me to mention here that he's not Catholic, he's Episcopalian, which my grandmother used to say, he's a Catholic who goes to hell. Or they can say what so we tried again, and we spoke briefly about our bullying. We didn't need to tell bullied queer kids what it's like. They're living it. We spoke briefly about the bullying, so they know that we went through it too, and we got through it. And then we spoke for 8 minutes about our joy. We don't have 14 minutes of joy, because we're Catholic. We can't sustain it for that long. And that was the first one we released, the second It Gets Better video. I'm not going to go too much into It Gets Better because I want to talk about Catholicism, so I'm not going to do the whole It Gets Better download. But the It Gets Better project accomplished 2 things. It saved lives. It has saved lives. As we've seen in the last week or 2, it hasn't saved everyone. And that hurts. But it has saved lives. We have heard from thousands of LGBT kids, and you don't have to take my word for that. Everybody who's participated in the It Gets Better project has created their own YouTube account to upload their video. And you can see in the comment threads of all these now 40,000 It Gets Better videos, you can see kids reaching out in real time and receiving help. You can see kids being talked off ledges and being given the hope that Harvey Milk charged us with giving to young queers. And we also know of cases where people were interacting with people who created It Gets Better videos and sent emergency, called 911.